Before we get started, just a quick note, spoiler alert.
And we are adults, and I will try very hard not to use adult language, but this is the warning.
Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of Last Library on the Left. My name is Jennifer.
And my name is Sadina. We're a horror review and discussion podcast where we talk about horror in books, movies, and other formats, why we seek it out, and why we need it in our lives.
And before we start today's episode, I just want you to know my daughter's eating chips.
Yeah.
So if you hear something in the background, that's her.
Yeah, it's not Chainsaw this time. We've got a kiddo in the area.
So today we're going to be discussing the book Affinity by Sarah Waters. Publisher is Virago. It's a UK book, and we're talking about Affinity because we are going to be going into Bly Manor.
Affinity is inspired by the original Turn of the Screw. It definitely has quite a few of the same elements. Unreliable narrators, a little spooky. It's a spiritualist movement type story. Some of the names are very similar.
Yes.
Instead of Peter Quint, we have Peter Quick. And then there's Miss Jelf?
Mrs. Jelf. Yeah.
Right, Mrs. Jelf instead of Miss Jessel.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of names that are definitely very similar. Instead of reading the original Turn of the Screw by Henry James, we read Affinity, partly because it was inspired and very similar, but also sort of partly because it's the only queer-inspired adaptation.
Yes. Before we get into the discussion, I just wanted to say I appreciated your recommendation on us reading it because I enjoyed this take on the story. It was refreshing to have queer characters.
Yes. I also think, and we'll definitely talk about this more later in the podcast, but in Turn of the Screw, it's all an unreliable narrator, as well as the movie adaptation, the recent one in 2018. I went and I saw that with our friend Em. We left that theater super confused and unsure of what we had just seen. In fact, we went to a Half Price Books later the next day to go get Henry James' Turn of the Screw, and of course it was all sold out because the movie. I'm glad that we did Affinity instead, because the unreliable narrator is still there.
Yeah.
But, y'all, they flip it on us.
Yeah. Listen, this is a book you have to read because after you hear our discussion, you'll know why. I really encourage y'all to read it because it was so good.
Yes. Sarah Waters definitely did a lot of research, first off.
Yes.
This is her second book. When she was writing this book, she was actually in the middle of research for women's prisons and prison reform. You can see her research.
You can, yeah. She makes it very believable, the way she paints a picture of what you're reading. As a reader, you could tell that she did a lot of research because a lot of the background that she gave you as far as what Margaret was experiencing was really in-depth, without a lot of words almost, because this was a short book.
It was a short book, but it was also written in first person, but through diary.
Right.
The diary entries are set up with our two main, not even sure you can really call them both protagonists, because the whole unreliable narrator thing, and the way that those last 10 pages really flip you around, it messes you up, y'all.
Yeah.
But for now, we'll say two protagonists.
Right.
Margaret Pryor, who is of a higher class, she's a scholar, and then we have Selena Dawes, who is much younger. She is a spiritualist medium in the beginning of the spiritualist movement. She's in prison.
Yes.
For acts of fraud and, what was the other reason?
Fraud and, wasn't it fraud and harassment?
Fraud and assault.
Fraud and assault, yes.
So she's in prison for fraud and assault, which we'll discuss in a few minutes because that is definitely the opening scene.
Yes.
But I want to clarify that she is charged with fraud and assault because she cannot be directly charged with murder.
Yes.
Because of the way that the first scene carries out. So the very first opening scene is what is called a sitting, which is where a spiritualist medium has a sitter, and the sitter is their client. And in this case, the client is a high-class young lady by the name of Madeline Sylvester. She is there specifically, it sounds, to meet Peter Quick, because there is a mention in the first diary entry that other ladies have come specifically to meet this Peter Quick. And Peter Quick is basically Selena's control spirit, her quote unquote main spiritual connection that guides her through her spiritual sittings. And during this process, the lights are off. Selena is in a cabinet,
which is typical for that day in spiritualism.
I've also recently discovered is actually still practiced.
Oh,
yes.
I didn't know
I didn't either. And I discovered it while watching Surviving Death. And there's a medium who uses not a cabinet per se, but is locked up in a curtain little enclosure.
Yeah.
And she's tied to a chair and everything. And I, especially after reading this book, I find it very suspicious that this is still the way that mediums, physical mediums in particular, which are the mediums that call forth spirits to inhabit them. Yeah, I find it very suspicious that that is still a practice. I mean, this book, y'all, I am very open-minded to the spiritual world for lots of personal reasons. I've always found mediums a little suspect. Just by the nature of what they do. Physical mediums in particular. But I went in this book, hook, line, and sinker, all in for Selena as a spiritualist, as a medium. And by the end of it, I came out not trusting myself. Not trusting the illusion to begin with.
Selena did a number on me too. I believed her. Like you, hook, line, and sinker. I believed everything that she was doing was real. Everything that she was talking about. Everything that she professed to be about. And it was not.
This book shook me up, y'all.
I still think about it. And I'm trying to read other books. And I just keep thinking about this one. So I'm having a hard time kind of like moving forward.
Sarah Waters very clearly did a lot of research, not only into women's prisons for this, but into the spiritual movement.
Yes. You know, when we talk off air, I tell Sadina that I think a lot about a couple of lore episodes that I've listened to that talk about spiritualism and talk about some of the spiritualists who played games with their customers. While I was reading this, I kept going back to those episodes. It was really a mind F.
Yes, agreed. Because I do believe that there are people out there who can genuinely act as a physical medium to the other side. That could be very naive of me, maybe. Fine, I'm okay with that. In all honesty, I also kind of thought that Surviving Death, the show, was going to rebolster my belief in spiritual mediumship, and it did not. I came out even more disillusioned with physical mediumship than what this book did to me. It was unfortunate because the show actually sold me on near-death experiences. Which I have not always fully bought into. Going back to the opening scene. The opening scene is this ritual. Selena is in this cabinet, which I also want to bring up was started by the Davenport brothers. The Davenport brothers were spiritualists or performers. They gave people what they thought they needed, but they had these cabinets that kind of became the staple for what Selena's using. So Selena's in this cabinet. She's tied up in some which way by probably Madeline to show trust. And Madeline is laid out unclothed. We maybe find out later. Which is a little
suspect.
We didn't realize that. You don't get that in the beginning.
No.
Although, you know, I guess that maybe it does further the charges of assault, though. Because what eventually happens to Madeline is Selena calls forth her spirit control, Peter Quick. Peter Quick steps out of the cabinet. He manifests. But he's later described as a naughty spirit. He's a low spirit. So he comes out of the cabinet and he proceeds to frighten Madeline to the point where she's like, I'm uncomfortable. I don't like this. I don't want anything to do with this. I don't consent. Not in those words because they didn't have words like consent back then. Selena and Peter try to convince her not to panic and to calm down. So Peter winds up assaulting her. Selena sort of holds her down, puts her hands around her neck, I believe. Madeline screaming from this assault brings the woman of the house, Mrs. Brink, who we'll talk about later. She's sort of the patron of Selena. And Mrs. Brink comes in. As the spiritualists need the room to be dark, Miss Brink comes in with a candle or whatever.
Her form of light.
Her form of light. And casts the room in light and sees not only Peter Quick manifested, who then starts hollering, turn out the light, it burns, it hurts, which was another reason why it sold me on it.
I know!
Oh, God. Okay, so he's complaining about the light, it burns, and she sees his white skinny legs, and he's in a nightshirt or whatever, and he takes off into the night. But she also sees Madeline having been assaulted, and the shock of the whole scenario, I think, gives her a heart attack. It's later described that she had a weak heart to begin with, but she has a heart attack and dies later that night. And that is where the first scene ends, is this spiritual sitting gone horribly wrong for everyone involved.
Yes, for everyone involved.
Which is also why Selena is never charged with murder. Because even though Mrs. Brink dies, it's not by her hand, and it was like weird and kind of convoluted.
It was the circumstances that killed her, not Selena actually putting her hands on her that killed her.
And with that, we set up with the diary entries that really just work to sell you on
what Sarah Waters is trying to do to our minds. Sarah Waters was playing with our heads, and she did it very well.
Yes, Sarah Waters. Hey, baby. Sarah Waters knew exactly what she was doing. I thought that Peter Quick was always a spirit. Oh, she knew.
Yeah, she sold you on the description of Peter Quick. I want to say Quint. She sold you on the idea of Peter as a spirit that Selena worked up to achieve to, I guess, connect with him. Because Selena wasn't always the spiritualist that she came to be when she was put in prison. As you're going through the diary entries, you're hearing how she's moving up, she's connecting with Peter Quick. For me, that's what made it more believable that he was an actual spirit that she was in contact with, because I had no reason to believe otherwise.
Right. We had no other reason. And they also really sell Margaret initially as the unreliable narrator.
They did, yeah.
Sarah definitely sets Margaret up as your unreliable narrator, and as people who have read and watched other adaptations, you go in suspecting to have an unreliable narrator. So like everything worked against us in our way to break down this book, and it just y'all, we really got suckered in.
I mean, I haven't been this suckered in anything in a while.
Right.
And like I always try to tell someone, I pride myself on being smarter than most things, and I felt very dumb after this.
Yes, I finished the book, put it down, and was like, well, I'm a effing idiot.
Yeah. I mean, same. I think I finished it in the middle of the night, and I was like, wait, what? And then I went back and I reread the last 10 pages, and I was like, wait, I did read that right. What?
It's very disruptive.
It really is. But it's such a journey for the reader, right?
Before we go further into the diary entries and the actual book, I would like to set up the ages.
Yes. It's very important for our discussion to talk about the ages.
Margaret Pryor, who is one of our two protagonists, she is set at 29. It is 2 years after losing her father in a subsequent suicide attempt. Selena Dawes is in her late teens. I'm reluctant to assume 18 or 19 because she doesn't sound like she's being treated as an adult.
Right, yeah.
She's got Mrs. Brink as a patron. She is being treated later, you see in the story at this hotel she stayed at, as sort of the prodigal child of the spiritual movement.
Yeah.
I'm guessing 16, 17.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to assume her age either, but I think you might be correct. 16, 17, maybe 18, 19 while she's in the prison.
Because she's been in prison for a little bit when she meets Margaret.
Yeah.
Ruth Viggers is another name that we need to keep track of because Ruth Viggers is the maid. Right. She's the maid for Mrs. Brink. Ruth is actually present in the first scene. Ruth's age is never outright specified. She's only physically described. And she's physically described as stout, a little masculine looking, not particularly pleasant, I guess. They call everybody who's pretty handsome. Yeah. She's not described as handsome, but she's also described as quite a bit older.
And I think it's safe to say she's at least 30 plus, if anything.
She's definitely is older than Margaret. Somewhere in her 30s, mid-30s, maybe even as old as her early 40s.
Probably. There's no telling. And you were telling me that you looked up the character who played her character in one of the movie adaptations, and that she was a lot older than the character that played Selena.
Yes. And so I'm kind of basing some of my age assumptions on this casting.
You would think that it would probably be accurate to the book.
The little trash he's playing with, it's his favorite toy. So yes, you're right. I was basing that on the casting assumption.
Yeah, which is very smart, by the way.
You know, that's sweet of you, because I was like, why am I basing it on a casting assumption when they cast 30-year-olds to play 15-year-olds?
I mean, that's true. But still, I wouldn't have thought to do that, so...
So take our guess for Ruth's age with a grain of salt. Yeah. She's definitely older than Selena.
Yes.
And very possibly older than Margaret by a few years, at least. Definitely an issue later. We are going to discuss a little bit more about Margaret Pryor and her home life, but we'll discuss it as sort of an expanding circle of her influences the further we go. Same with Selena. For Margaret, she is the middle child of 3 kids. She has an older brother and a younger sister. Her older brother is married. He is a barrister or a lawyer. Yeah. She has a mother. Her mom is kind of a bitch.
Yeah. I mean, kind of, no. She is certified.
Yes. She's, and her sister.
Her younger sister is the same way, cut from the same cloth as mom.
So, younger sister's full name is Priscilla, but her nickname is Pris, and she lives by that.
She does.
I actually like Steven for how little he shows up, because he's very practical.
Yes. He doesn't show up quite often, but when he does show up, he's very, I want to say rational. He's very sound. Grounding. That's a good word, yes.
Because there's a lot of dinner parties that show up in Margaret's diary entries where there's a lot of gossip.
Yeah.
High society socialites gossiping about stuff. In particular, Selena at one point, because they think Margaret is a spinster at 29.
Rude.
Right. So not only a spinster, but a woman who tries to go above her station as far as seeking to be a scholar.
Yeah. Oh, God. So rude.
I know. But her brother Stephen is very grounding. He kind of seems to be grounding for a lot of the family.
Yeah. I want to say as annoying and as intimidating as Pris and the mom are, he's the exact opposite. And he helps, I don't want to say he helps balance those two out, but he kind of does.
Yeah. And then she's got her father who passed away 2 years prior. Her father was a Renaissance scholar, and Margaret worked as his assistant. She did a lot of research with him, a lot of work. She herself probably was a scholar in as much as she was allowed to be as a woman in that time. She has a sister-in-law named Helen, who is very important.
Yeah.
And she has a brother-in-law, Arthur, I think. The Pryor household also has a maid, Boyd.
Yes. Selena is in the hotel, and she's there with other mediums, I believe. And Mrs. Brink actually had a dream about Selena. And so she comes to the hotel, she meets Selena, and she tells her, I had a dream about you, you're gonna help me find my mom. She convinces Selena to move in with her.
After a couple of sittings.
Yeah, because she just believes in the power of Selena, almost. She's like fallen under her spell. Selena eventually moves into Mrs. Brink's house.
She moves in with Mrs. Brink because Mrs. Brink sort of pesters her into it.
Yeah, Mrs. Brink is very pushy, y'all. And I think like her pushiness stems from her desperation to want to see her mother, because her mother has passed, and so that's the whole reason why Brink has found Selena. It stems from that desperation to really want to see mom, that she just pushy and so aggressive with Selena.
It works out time-wise for her because she kind of needs to leave the hotel anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks to Mrs. Brink, her status as a medium has skyrocketed.
Yeah.
Mrs. Brink is her best hype man. She's just like me. She bought in hook, line, sinker.
Yeah. Was it one of the first seances that she had? One of the earlier seances? She was like, I saw my mom. Like, she was just, she bought in.
But also it was Mr. Vinci, who was the owner of the hotel.
And he was very creepy with Selena. And I don't know his age. Oh, God.
Yeah, no. I mean, if he was a hotel proprietor, they don't age some of the hotel guests. Mr. Vinci owns a hotel with his wife. They host specifically mediums.
Right.
Because either he or his wife are also of the spiritualist movement.
And Selena depicts him as very, grotesque.
Well, he's a creep. He leers on
he's
her.
a creep. And he's such a, almost like pedo-ish.
She heard shuffling on the landing. And so she called out, Mr. Vinci, are you okay? And he was like, oh, I was fixing the rug so you won't trip on it. And so she went over and she stuffed a cloth into the keyhole, because y'all, that was not shuffling.
No.
That was something else.
He was doing something.
Yeah. It was not okay.
Poor Selena.
Right.
You know, when she writes this, you really do feel, oh my gosh, poor Selena, poor little girl having to deal with this. But she's going to what I would consider an equally bad situation too with Mrs. Brink.
Yes. Selena is definitely sold to us as someone who was preyed upon quite a bit by the people in her bubble. Not saying that she wasn't. She was definitely preyed upon by the people in her bubble. But that shaped a lot of how she interacted with people later.
Yeah. So, I mean, We'll get into it.
We'll get into it. There's some issues of cycles of abuse there.
Yeah.
And man, I recently watched a thing they called Abuse of a Minor, the gift that keeps giving, because it creates a cycle.
Right.
And the minor goes on to abuse another minor, and so and so and so. We'll talk about it further into the episode, but
this book does a number on you.
Yeah.
From all angles. So we also meet Margaret's first entries, and Margaret is on her way to Millbank Prison. She is there to offer companionship to the prisoners, but she's writing about her experiences because she's trying to make herself feel better. She did attempt suicide, and we go into her reasoning behind it later on. We're going to talk about this. Mental health matters, and her mental health was not taken care of.
No.
This is not the way to care for yourself by going to make yourself feel better by visiting prisoners.
No. Her mental health was not taken care of, but it was still the best taken care of out of the other...
Out of most of the characters you encounter in the novel.
It's unfortunate.
So now I think we should talk about the atmosphere of the prison and set up the weather a bit, because the weather does play an important part of reading, or
How
the
you
atmosphere.
perceive Margaret's stability throughout.
Yeah. When we enter the prison, sun is shining. She does mention that the walls are taller, and it does seem a little foreboding a little bit, but she's looking out and she's watching the prisoners do their daily exercise, which I think they're just walking around in their clothes, and their clothes are kind of drab and sad.
When they're walking in circles.
I remember in the book reading, she's looking down on them as they're walking.
Okay. You want to come talk to Chainsaw?
Yeah.
Okay.
Both of our kids are here today.
Yes.
Okay, you stay up there. Good boy.
So the sun is shining, and I almost want to say that Margaret feels sort of hopeful about the situation. That's how it made me feel, right? That she was a little bit hopeful that this was going to make her feel better, which I roll. It just shows you the difference between almost her and Selena a little bit, because I felt like Selena's descriptions were kind of, I don't want to say they were dark, but they were darker than Margaret's.
a little bleak.
Yeah. Margaret's outlook is a little bit brighter in the beginning.
I did notice something, though, when she was describing the walls of the prison. I initially imagined gray walls because prison...
Yes, that's what I imagined.
But she calls them yellow.
Oh.
Which was weird.
She does.
Yeah. She says the walls are yellow, which
Yeah.
I'm sure this is just me reading into it, but it made me think of the yellow wallpaper, where the woman kind of went insane in her own forced enclosure.
I wonder if that's foreshadowing for us. Which, guys, if you haven't guessed by now.
Also, I gotta warn you, though, I did a lot more reading into stuff than I probably should have.
Yeah.
That sold me on what Sarah was trying to sell me on more.
Yeah.
Was that I did more reading into the signs and the imagery than I should have.
Whereas I disregarded a lot and was like, oh, let's just take it for what it is and just keep it going. And I was the dumb casual reader. It was really funny.
No, you weren't the dumb casual reader, because I was overzealous to interpret everything. And so every note I took down I'd be like, this is important. And then I would read the wrong thing into it. And then later it would come up and I was like, oh, I'm such a idiot. God, I'm such an idiot.
I mean, between the two of us, we read it perfectly.
That's true. Whether you're the person who overanalyzes or the casual reader, gonna still buy into it.
Yeah.
What Sarah wants you to buy into.
Yeah, she did a good job playing us off each other, because I didn't realize we had read it and taken it so different until we started comparing notes. So that was really, really hysterical for me.
Yeah.
Because Sadina picked up on some things. I was like, oh, I don't remember that. We'll talk about it later. She picked up on the violet. I was like, what? There was a violet there?
In my defense, my book on the cover has got the violet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I read the ebook, and so I just skipped through the cover. So, yeah, she picked up on some things that I didn't pick up on. And in Margaret's first journal entry, I think this is where we also get their first encounter. That's not technically an encounter because they're passing by each other. Or she passes by herself.
She passes by her cell when Margaret first encounters Selena. She has been walked through parts of the prison and introduced to different prisoners by one of the matrons.
And they're mean.
They're so mean. Well, except for one of them. And then it turns out that that's a problem too.
Yeah.
So as she's kind of gone through, she actually just met a prisoner who was there for quote unquote public nuisance.
Yeah.
But what that meant was that she had actually attempted suicide multiple times, and the public decided that her depression, her mental health, was a public nuisance.
Yeah.
And they put her in jail for it.
I remember what we just told you about Margaret. She attempted suicide and she's going to visit prisoners.
Yes.
So that just references what Sadina said earlier. Her mental health was better taken care of than most people's.
Yes, and I think that reality of her status, her privilege,
Yeah.
and even though she was still suffering, was still in a better position thanks to her status in society. And that really shook her up. And so she actually leaves the matron. And Margaret walks to the end of the hall.
Overcome with emotion.
Yeah. And as she's leaning against a cell, she hears this very forlorn sigh, and she, in her mind, connects it to her own. She says it felt as if the sigh had been her own.
Yeah.
So immediately there's a connection. She sees Selena, all of a sudden, she's the brightest spot in the prison. She's
almost ethereal-like,
yes.
right?
She compares her to a Crivelli painting that does not exist. Which is ironic because she titles the painting Veritas, which is truth. But Crivelli was a Renaissance painter, and he focused on religious art, the Madonna, bright blonde hair, ethereal women. There's apparently one curl of blonde hair coming out from Selena's bonnet.
Yeah.
That, everything. The blonde curl, which you find out later is she has a type.
Yeah.
The blonde curl, the brighter cell, the deep sigh that she thought was reaching out to her own on a metaphysical level, which I bought into.
Yeah.
I was so suckered. She immediately has this connection with her, and she's so taken with Selena. And then Selena turns around and she has a bright violet that she has that she's clutching, which I think sold Margaret even more on Selena.
Yeah.
How did she get this violet?
Right,
And
where did it come from? And oh, she's special.
Right.
I mean, because I think immediately Margaret thought that Selena was very, very special, and that's why there was that connection.
Well, she even asks a porter later, do plants grow on this soil? And the porter was like, no, of course they don't. Like, nothing can grow on this soil. Do you see it? It's gross. And so she's even more taken by this violet, which I, of course, looked up, and violets mean spiritual wisdom. And I was like, oh my God.
It means something.
It's important. It was not. It was.
It was.
But not in the way that I thought it was.
Right, yeah. It was important to Margaret, and that was the point that Sarah was trying to communicate to us.
No, but Sarah misled us specifically.
She did.
They knew she knew suckers like me were going to see the violet and be like, oh, it's spiritual wisdom, and she's a spiritualist, and oh my God, it's real. And
yeah, Sarah, if you ever listen to this episode, thanks.
Yeah, I was all in. It just really hurt more at the end. That's fine.
I wonder if Margaret had not had that encounter with Selena on her behalf, if she would have gone back to the prison.
Or ever gone back to Margaret.
Right.
Because Margaret's cell, it sounded like it was kind of out of the way.
Yeah.
It was around a corner and it was towards the end of a hall.
Yeah. I wonder if she hadn't had the encounter with the other prisoner who was there, and the realization that came to her that she could have been in jail, but she wasn't. Would she have encountered Selena, and would she have felt that? Because you read that, the way I read it anyways, was that she almost felt like a pull between her and Selena, and she just had to go back.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it's one of the things I wonder.
I mean, and there were a few reasons why she felt that pull. The violet, the blonde hair.
Yeah. So now we're going to revisit some of the other side characters that we didn't mention prior. Helen, as you know, is Stephen's wife, Margaret's sister-in-law. Helen is also Margaret's love interest. Helen and Margaret were in a relationship, and Helen broke things off with Margaret because she was going to marry Stephen, and that is what was a catalyst to Margaret attempting suicide because she just couldn't handle. She was being broken up with, and then too that this person was marrying her brother.
Yeah.
You know, that's a tough pill to swallow. So it really threw her for a loop, and that's how we meet Helen. And Helen she's not shy about showing affection to Stephen either, which to me is a slap in the face.
Yeah.
You know, you knew what we shared, and you knew how you talked to me when we were together, and to just kind of turn her back on that part of her life, especially in that time when it wasn't necessarily acceptable to be a part of the LGBTQ community. So I can only imagine the rejection that Margaret felt and the shame that she felt.
And this wasn't even a one-sided affair or a bosom buddies type interest.
Right.
Margaret has a gold locket that she keeps that was given to her by her father, but inside of the locket is a curl of blonde hair from Helen.
Yeah.
That is a lover's token.
Yeah.
That is not something you give to a bosom buddy.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like Helen was all in their relationship until, and maybe you can correct me, because I'm not sure how Stephen and Helen's relationship even came together.
I don't know.
I don't think we don't know.
Because we rely on the diary entries, it took Margaret by surprise.
Yeah.
So for us, as readers, it sort of takes you by surprise.
Yeah, because you're just like, what?
Like, when and how and why?
I was offended on Margaret's behalf.
Yes.
I wanted to slap Helen a few times. So, I mean,
because she's still really overly affectionate with her, even
Yeah.
after the marriage.
Right, and it's almost like she's playing games with Margaret, which I felt bad for Margaret because I felt later down the line, I feel like Selena played games with her. I feel like a lot of people were playing games with Margaret, and so I felt a lot of empathy for this character because as a female in that time, it just seemed like she was susceptible to it. Any type of female attention that she got, she was happy for.
Well, and everything else in her home life, she was treated so dismissively.
Right. You know, with her mom and her sister and dad being gone and probably being one of maybe two positive people in her life. It just, you felt bad for Margaret. At first, I wanted to like Helen. I really did. But no.
Yeah.
She was not a redeeming character.
No.
And Margaret shouldn't have even tried to kill herself over her.
Well, and I think that part of that grief, too, was connected to her father.
Right, yeah.
And she met Helen through her father.
Yeah.
Helen was a student of his when he was lecturing. Which is like all these layers of familial connection.
Yeah.
And to have it all kind of turned against her.
Yes. Poor Margaret.
Yeah. She was being medicated, too.
Right, yeah, because she was taking something called, I think it's chloral?
Chloral. It's basically like an opium.
Yeah.
To help her sleep because she's got a uterus and has hysteria or whatever it was.
Right, yeah.
Because she was a repressed gay woman. That's what the problem
And that's
was.
literally what it was.
That's all it was that she couldn't live her best life and she had to be medicated for it.
Right, and rather than be charged as a public nuisance, this is what they chose to do.
Right, which, so many...
Boo on them.
Right, lots of problematic issues, but...
What is it that I said the last time? Kick rocks. They can kick rocks.
Jennifer and I have different ways of expressing our frustration. I go full sailor mouth, and Jennifer, as the caregiver of a small child, says kick rocks.
I get creative.
Which just really highlights more the difference between our language than anything. Y'all, I struggle on this podcast.
She does. I can see Sadina hold it in that F.
It's a real problem. But in my own house, in my own home,
right.
Under my roof, I got a potty mouth. So, anyway, all of that said, Margaret met Helen through her father, who was a lecturer on, I assume, Renaissance, because that's all they mentioned.
Right, and it just seems like that would probably be based on Margaret comparing Selena to the artwork.
Right.
You would just think that that's where she's got her background knowledge in because that's where she was allowed to research through dad.
And her father even has a Crivelli painting at the house.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, it's the Veritas, which doesn't exist.
Right.
But Crivelli is definitely a focal point. Sorry, Chainsaw's playing with his new toy. So if you hear any crinkling, that's my baby going after his new toy. When I looked into who Crivelli was, that's actually one of the reasons why I was bought into Margaret being an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
I did not buy into her hysteria or her anxiety because I knew right off the bat that she was a repressed queer woman.
Yeah.
I get that coding. It was the hyper-religiosity. I thought that she, because her views of the weather drastically changed around Selena.
Yeah.
She put her under this holy light, this
right.
ethereal light, that I just assumed that part of Margaret's problem was hyper-religiosity.
Yeah.
For those of you that maybe don't know what hyper-religiosity is a mental disorder that is actually more severe than what I was reading into in the book. But her focus on Crivelli as a Renaissance point kind of made me lean towards, oh, she's a little fanatical in her religion thanks to her research and her repression. Oh, God, I just really read so much into this, y'all.
Yeah. I mean, because in my brain, she had a little bit of PTSD and she was definitely grieving the loss of her dad. I say PTSD because I feel like it was induced based off of her traumatic experience with Helen, the breakup, and with Helen just kind of blasé almost moving on with Stephen, being affectionate with Stephen, being affectionate with Margaret, and playing those almost like mind games with her.
Choosing Stephen, but sort of choosing Stephen because he's the easy choice. You know, like the acceptable choice.
Especially at one point she told Margaret, like, you're so brave. So you see that in Margaret and you're building her up only to break her down and choose the easy path for yourself. Margaret focused so much on her saying that she was brave that I feel like that was a turning point for Margaret where she was really ready to stand up and be proud of her orientation and her relationship with Helen.
Maybe even especially as two scholarly women.
Right.
Not just two queer women, but two queer women of high intelligence, of high society.
I know that when I read read romances and then you hear, based off of growing up, that there was always that one older lady who lived with her female roommate. Like, you know, I feel like they were headed towards that future, but Helen dashed it all to shreds. I just feel like Margaret definitely had a lot of trauma, especially with Helen, and I don't like Helen because of that.
Same. Speaking of not liking people, or okay, we're gonna talk about the matrons
Yes.
of Millbank a little bit, at least the most important ones. So there's a couple of matrons. There's different matrons for the different cell blocks and levels, but the two we're gonna focus on are Miss Ridley and Miss Jelf.
Yes.
Which is inspired by Jessel. Miss Jelf is the one that stands out as the kindest. She's definitely the most lenient. She's the sweetest, whatever you want to say. She definitely stands out from the other matrons.
Yeah.
And Miss Ridley, kind of a bitch. She,
Yeah.
like,
Hella.
Yeah.
Like, definitely.
She's not subtle in her homophobia. She kind of mocks the intimacies that the prison inmates develop, sort of out of necessity. I mean, especially the lifers.
Right, yeah.
Ugh, and the whole fact that the matrons prefer lifers because they're stuck was kind of like bullshit. Whatever. They don't like the petty criminals because the petty criminals are, I guess, too wild, too brazen, too individual.
Right,
And they prefer the lifers. Miss Ridley definitely has a very outward opinion of putting down the inmates. In fact, there's a scene where Margaret is being shown, so every time she visits, she's shown sort of a different part of the prison. And one part, she's actually watching the intake of new prisoners. And as they're doing the intake, she's kind of zoning out as she watches these women get their head shaved, or not shaved, they're having their hair cut.
Yeah, their hair cut.
Really short. It's to their chin, I think is what someone said. But she's watching them being placed in these very monotonous spaces.
Right.
And not being individualized.
Yeah, because they're all wearing the same type of clothing, and yeah.
And so she's kind of zoning out, watching all this. And Miss Ridley is watching her watch these other women. And when the women go to another room to take off their clothes and wash, Miss Ridley makes a snide comment of, "Oh, are you going to join them?" It was just so...
Miss Ridley was so full of hate.
Yes, she was. She was not subtle about it. She let Margaret know in no uncertain terms that she was onto her.
Yeah.
And she did not approve.
Right, and she did not like Margaret visiting the jail. She did not like her visiting the prison at all. Why she let her continue? Well, I guess because the head matron let her continue. She was very adamant that this was not her choice.
Yeah. Those are the two most important matrons. The others, Miss Haxby, I believe, is the head matron, but she doesn't play as big a role.
Right. These are the two we need you to focus on.
And now we can talk about the relationship that actually develops between Margaret and Selena as Margaret continues to visit the prison.
Margaret doesn't necessarily just visit Selena. Like Sadina said, as she visits the prison each day, she visits a new aspect of the prison, but she also visits different prisoners. And I don't know that she necessarily writes about them because the only writings we get are the writings about Selena, really. Real in-depth writings are about Selena. But her last prisoner to meet and who she spends the most time with is Selena. And so she gets to know Selena, really develops this relationship to her. And it's almost like a magnet. She's just drawn to Selena. Like I always say, she saves the best for last, you know?
Yes, because she does initially go into the prison and meet with a random
Right.
prisoner, but she always ends her day with Selena.
And I think because I think she even mentioned to Selena at one point that she's her last visitor on her visitor list for the day. We kind of see their interaction play out, and I felt that it was almost like Selena was playing with Margaret a little bit, playing on her emotions, and this is where we see a lot of the haunting actually comes into play, because the locket, you know, we talked about the locket and how important it was to Margaret because it had Helen's lock of hair in it, and at one point, which Selena must have pegged her as queer early on.
She must have. I think, though, that Margaret's not particularly subtle.
Right.
You know, Margaret does have lingering gazes, and she does, especially if in her mind, she's...
almost idolizing her.
Yes.
Right? Like I said, I think Selena almost realized really early on that she was queer, and there was a scene where Selena's kind of approaching her. She's almost getting ready to touch her, and she feels the locket, and that very night, the locket goes missing. And Margaret, she's freaking out about it. This is something that she never thought would happen. She's not sure why it's happening. And when she goes to the jail the next day, Selena's like, well, are you going to tell me about the locket?
Yeah. Selena has these, she calls them her spirit friends.
Yeah.
That the spirits and the voices that are always with with her, like Peter Quick, inform her about Margaret and what she does at home and the diary she keeps and how in her diary Selena's name is in there over and over and over again, kind of teasing her about her knowing how Margaret truly feels.
Yeah, and she just plays off of that, and in a way she starts haunting Margaret.
Well, and we find out later she has an accomplice.
Right.
Because... So we mentioned Boyd earlier. That is the Pryor family maid. And Boyd eventually comes to Mrs. Pryor and says, I can't work here anymore.
Right.
The house is haunted since the passing of Mr. Pryor. I hear footsteps. I hear murmuring. I hear him calling my name. I'm hearing things. I'm haunted. I don't want to be here anymore. And Mrs. Pryor's like, are you kidding me? Like, ghost? Like, what is your problem? And it kind of says like she's going to dismiss her anyway based on that. And Mrs. Pryor's like, what are we going to do? And Boyd says, I have someone. I can recommend someone. A friend of a friend or whatever is looking for work, and she's highly recommended because she doesn't believe in such things.
Yeah.
She has already poo-pooed the idea of ghosts.
Yeah.
And so Mrs. Pryor hires Miss Viggers.
We mentioned her before.
Yes. So Miss Viggers is now the new maid. And the night that Miss Viggers starts is when the locket disappears.
Or she just turns out her house looking for the locket.
Yeah, because she doesn't want to accuse her because one of the inmates was a maid who broke her mistress's chain, and on the way to get it fixed so she wouldn't be dismissed for breaking it, she was caught with it on her possession and was fired for stealing.
Right.
Margaret, being the softie that she is, didn't want a similar incident to happen in her own household and kind of let it go.
Yeah.
But then was told, oh, my spirit friends, and...
Yeah. And Selena, she takes a lot of joy into kind of freaking Margaret out, because initially Margaret doesn't believe in ghosts. When Selena was talking about her spirit friends, Margaret asked her, well, what about your real friends? You know, and she's like, those are my real friends, my spirit friends. So I think as she continues on with haunting Margaret starts to believe, and I think she almost depends on Selena to give her information to help her in what she's going through at home.
Yeah, Selena's definitely guiding her.
Yeah.
Even though Selena's younger.
Yeah, at one point you don't realize that Margaret is the oldest one in this. Selena's definitely acting like the more mature adult between the two during their interactions, and Margaret just comes off as very naive.
She does. Even though she's 10 years older.
Right, yeah.
Selena really pulls one over on her. The story is set up in such a way that you as the reader also kind of believe, you know? You don't know what Peter Quick was. He reacted so oddly to the light and and everything, and I was very suspicious of Peter Quick. The violet, you know, coming out of nowhere, and the misdirection there, and the dream Mrs. Brink had.
Yeah.
There are definitely elements that sell you on that idea that Selena's tapped into something else.
Right, I mean, Sarah Waters, much like Selena, plays us very well. Because Selena doesn't give you a lot of details about Peter Quick. Well, she doesn't give enough details for my taste. I would prefer a little bit more to know about Peter, because based on what I've read, it does seem like he's an apparition that's coming to her, and he's a bad one at that. And I kept thinking that the book is going to end with her battling it out with Peter and Margaret's helping, right? That was my natural inclination.
Ooh, that would have been interesting.
Right? Like, that's what I thought was going to happen.
Man, supernatural showdown.
But I was wrong.
We were so wrong.
So it's just,
But you know, Sarah Waters really puts all those clues, though, that she was trying to tell us the whole time.
She was, yeah.
And we just didn't read them right.
No, we didn't. We read them. You read them all the way one way. I read them all the way the other way.
Now that I look back on it, she even outright told us that it was all kind of a scam.
Yeah.
Because there's a pamphlet.
Right, the pamphlet.
Yes, the pamphlet that I think Selena has at Mr. Vincey's hotel, because it's Mr. Vincey who gives it to her. It's a pamphlet on the different levels that the spirit travels through the medium, which is why the spirit that is in hell, like Peter Quick, is a low spirit or a naughty spirit. And that's all in the pamphlet. But at the very end of the pamphlet, there's two pieces of information.
Yeah.
How to preserve a flower using like muslin, and then how to create bioluminescence. And it was like, why was that necessary? Like, if you're talking about the levels of the spirit, when I read it, I was like, that's suspicious. And I was like, I'm sure it doesn't matter.
Right. Well, now that you mention it, I wonder if the violet was preserved in muslin.
You know, I think the muslin, though, was supposed to give the white appearance. And then the bioluminescent thing was a byproduct of something else.
Yeah.
I think the violet came from Ruth.
Yeah. Okay.
1,000%. Ruth Viggers gave her the violet. Everything was fake, y'all.
Yeah, everything was fake. Except for the dream. That's one thing that we...
Maybe.
I mean, how do we know that it wasn't real? Because we don't have Mrs. Brink to tell us.
Right.
So we just don't know anything about the dream.
And you can't trust Ruth, and Ruth was
No.
with Mrs. Brink, so, like, who knows?
Yeah, and you can't trust Selena at all.
No.
Back to Selena and Margaret, they actually... Well, Margaret develops a very intense love for Selena. She often compares her to Helen.
All the time.
I think what she feels for Selena is stronger because of what she had with Helen. And Selena's playing into it as well. Selena's very much playing into it. At one point, Selena mentions the word affinity and that they have an affinity for each other. And listen, I was no fan of Selena. I was just like, gag me at this point, right? Because you can almost tell that she's really playing this part.
Well, she's laying it on thick by then.
Yeah, it's very thick by then. She talks to Margaret and she's like, we can run away together. Let's be together. I can escape the cell. Help me escape. You are a woman of class.
My spirit friends will help.
That's right. Her spirit friends were going to help her escape the prison. And it was up to Margaret to empty her bank accounts, get the tickets for their voyage, their passports, and get everything ready because Selena was going to come and they were going to escape together. And Margaret listens. And she empties her accounts, gets a passport and a fake name for Selena, gets tickets. Margaret goes to sleep, and when she wakes up, Selena is not there. And
Well, because she was supposed to come to her that night.
right.
She said, my spirit friends will deliver me. And she never shows up.
No. So she takes a trip to the prison to find out where is Selena. Is she still maybe in her cell? Maybe she couldn't escape. So I think at this point, Margaret's pretty panicked when she heads to the prison. Right?
I don't think she realizes she's duped yet. I think she's panicked
No.
that the spirit friends were quote-unquote low spirits.
Right. Before we go into the rest of the story, let's backtrack and go into the research that Margaret was doing throughout her conversations with Selena. She goes to this...
And why she bought into everything.
Yes. She goes into a research facility and I think she wants to really just figure out if what Selena is doing as part of spiritualism is true or is it fake like she kind of thinks it is. And she meets Mr. Hither?
Yes.
Mr. Hither? I don't want to say he's like the head librarian there, but...
I mean, it sounds like they've got an archive there, so he's the head archivist? Maybe?
Yeah, he's something. God, he's something. She talks to him. She sees artifacts from Selena's seances. I think it's...
They're wax molds.
wax molds. Is it Peter Quick's?
It's supposed to be Peter Quick's manifestations. Which, interesting enough, when I was watching Surviving Death, they also have an archive of these things. I think Houdini was able to disprove the validity of these wax proof
Right.
of spirit manifestations. I really wish I'd watched Surviving Death before I read this book, because it would have saved me so much heartache. One of the things that she finds is a wax mold of what is supposedly Peter Quick's hand. And she's sold on it being Peter Quick's hand instead of Selena's, because it's this very, like, thick, chubby, stout hand.
Yeah.
Well, it's all veiny and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that sounds like a dude's hand, I
Yeah.
guess, versus, like, this dainty young woman's hand.
Right, because the way she painted Selena was always very dainty. And Mr. Hither is no help to her cause either because he strongly believes in Selena and her powers as a spiritualist.
Oh, he's the #1 fan of that club. He
Yeah.
is president of the Selena fan club for sure.
Yeah, because he definitely tells her, like, she's real, I've seen her, she inspired me to continue on this spiritualist journey, and I've had a couple seances myself. And I think his research and also the conversation she has with the other reader in the back, who has gone to a couple of the seances that Selena has performed, both of them affirm what Selena was always telling her. Margaret's like, oh, well, maybe she was telling the truth this whole time. And so she staunchly believes in Selena when Selena tells her, let's escape. She's bought into what Selena has fed her.
Right. And Mr. Hither has the court transcripts
Yeah.
from her trial.
Oh, gosh, the court transcripts, those made me mad.
Yeah. Oh, the prosecutor was a right dick.
He really was. So in the court transcripts, they couldn't charge Peter Quick with anything. So they tell you straight out, we can't charge him, so we're charging you. They asked Selena to basically give them details about what happened in the seance that went wrong. And Selena believes in client privilege, and so she doesn't share that stuff. But we've come to find out that it was was in her best interest not to share what really happened.
Yes.
But because she chooses not to share, he almost makes it seem like she was
a predator.
Yeah, and that these were her prey and that she was Peter Quick. Because at one point he asked her, please manifest him now. And she's like, I can't. It's too hostile of an environment. And he's like...
Oh my god.
But the way he came at her.
He also accused her of preying specifically on young women.
Right.
Young rich women. So he kind of outs her.
Right, and the audience is laughing as he's doing it. You know, they're laughing at her and they're almost like mocking her.
Yeah. He brings up like, okay, well, why did you have to undress so much to have these seances? And I mean, yeah, it is suspect.
It is.
And we learn later.
Either.
Right. It definitely, when you're reading the transcripts as Margaret, you can see how she was pulled in further into Selena's guile, but the lack of clothing part was a little weird.
I mean, it was, but I was more heated at the fact that he was accusing this female of something. Yeah. And so as a woman, I was like, oh, hell no, you know? So I was a little bit more outraged for a different reason. But it really went to Margaret's detriment to have encountered the research, read the court transcripts, and talked to Mr. Hither. But to have talked to them and them kind of verifying everything that Selena said didn't help matters.
It really sold Margaret on everything. And even up to that point, too, in her research, you still believe that Margaret is the unreliable narrator in all of this. As we get closer to the big reveal, you find out that Margaret is not the unreliable narrator.
Not a tiny little bit.
No, that it's been Selena the whole time.
Yeah.
And that Selena has been... Sarah Waters as Selena has been fooling us all.
Yeah. Yep. So she goes to the prison. She finds out that Selena did manage to escape. I think she's almost afraid on her behalf that maybe the spirits took her, right?
Right. The spirits spirited her away to the wrong place.
Yeah. And maybe Peter Quick was behind it, right? He was almost played to be this really horrible villain to us at one point. Just thinking on behalf of Margaret, and you think of poor, sweet Selena and dangerous Peter Quick. So I can understand how she came to that conclusion. So she goes back home, and that's where she runs into Mrs. Jelf. This is where it gets really sad.
And Mrs. Jelf does not waste time going into what really happened.
Yeah. You find out that Mrs. Jelf's son passed away, and Mrs. Jelf has been helping Selena in the hopes that Selena would help her reconnect with her son. I think Selena did the same thing she did with Mrs. Brink and played her a little bit so she thought that she could have a deeper connection with her dead son. Mrs. Jelf, it turns out, is the one who helped her escape.
She got extra matron's clothes, snuck her out under the guise of a matron, used a fake name when she walked her out and a porter asked about it, and that she had also been kind of helping Ruth visit Selena. That's how the violet came into play, which that sigh, that deep, forlorn sigh, was not the forlorn sigh of someone who was distressed. It was the forlorn sigh of someone missing their lover.
Yeah.
And everything in the book reslots under this new light. You know?
That's a perfect word, reslots, because literally all the pieces fell into place and you're like, what in the heck?
Yes, everything that you questioned, and then all of a sudden it's, oh, Ruth, in every one of these instances.
Yeah.
The violet, possibly the dream.
Yeah.
The locket.
The locket.
Everything. And you're like, oh, I've been on a ride this whole time.
All the journal entries that Selena just happened to know about.
Yes.
Because of Ruth, the
her
maid.
Spirit friends reading the journal. Oh my God.
Yeah. Mrs. Jelf obviously lets the cat out of the bag. And Margaret she is shocked.
She's shocked.
And she goes searching through the house.
Oh, yeah. She tears that house to pieces.
Yeah.
Looking for proof that Selena was still there for her.
Yeah. Boy, is she met with heartbreak because Selena is not there. The tickets that she had are gone. The money is gone.
The passports.
It's all gone. Her journal is still perfectly intact, though. And then she goes to Ruth's quarters and she finds in a trunk Ruth's clothes and Selena's clothes intertwined.
It's as if she can imagine that night, the night before, that she thought Selena would come to her, that Selena was in the house but came to Ruth, her accomplice, her lover, her manipulator.
Yeah. It was Helen times 10 almost. Because she was in the house sleeping while they were reuniting. Mm-hmm. I mean, poor Margaret. My heart just felt for her. And
she did get kind of hysteric too, because she ran out to the street and got a police officer. And the police officer was like, I'm sure everything's fine. Ugh, fuck that police officer. Sorry. Sorry. But he was like, I'm sure everything's fine, miss. And she was like, no, you don't understand. And he was like, well, what are you talking about? And then she realized that she could possibly get in trouble herself.
Yeah.
For helping Selena escape or plan an escape. And so she was like, never mind. It's all fine. And the police officer was like, okay, crazy lady. Like, sure.
Right.
So your uterus is the problem.
Right. Let me get some, what is it that they used to use?
The smelling salts.
Lame.
Ugh, gross.
As if that wasn't bad enough, we get one last page. Guys, let me tell you something. If there was a single page that ruined my life, it was this page.
A single sentence.
Yeah, a single sentence. In the very last page, Ruth and Selena are together. This is
at Mrs. Brink's house.
Yeah, this is before Mrs. Brink passed away. They are very clearly in the aftermath of love making, and they're in bed, and is she smoking a cigarette?
Yeah, Ruth smoking a cigarette, and I remember thinking, that is not subtle at all.
Right, yeah, like, thanks, Sarah. like,
just in case you were wondering, this was the origin of their relationship the whole time.
Selena is being beckoned by Mrs. Brink, and she's like, I should probably go out there or whatever. So as Selena goes out to Mrs. Brink, Ruth delivers this one-liner.
Remember whose girl you are. Guys.
And the book ends on that sentence.
Yeah, on that sentence. And it's really problematic because actually the beginning sentence to that page was, it is very late and quiet. Mrs. Brink is in her room, her hair all down about her shoulders and a ribbon tied in it. She is waiting for me. Let her wait a little longer. Ruth is lying on my bed with her shoes kicked off. She is smoking one of Peter's cigarettes.
I didn't remember how Peter's cigarettes. You know, that last line just really took me for a loop. I just couldn't think about anything else.
Yeah, I had to read that page a couple of times because there's a lot revealed in that one page. Mm-hmm. There are allusions to Mrs. Brink having maybe an inappropriate closeness and affection to Selena.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That has nothing to do with her mother. It almost seems as if there is a sexual element to this patronage, which is very problematic.
Yes, because I mean, Mrs. Brink, and I don't want to say that it started off not inappropriate, because it was inappropriate from the get-go, from having her move in with her. But Mrs. Brink had her dress in her mother's clothing, which
put her in her mother's room.
Right, put her in her mother's room. And she dressed her up in her mother's jewels, you know?
She won't let her help other sitters.
Yeah.
Mrs. Brink wants her to be her sole point of mediumship.
Yeah. The relationship was definitely very inappropriate.
Unhealthy. And somehow at some point, Ruth and Selena also began to engage in a less than appropriate relationship.
Right.
Not at all for the sexual matter, because cool, you do you. All
it's
here
the
for the
age
queer.
Difference.
Right. It is the age difference that, especially as Selena as a minor, because she's maybe 19 when she's in prison. She was younger than that.
Yeah.
When her and Ruth first engaged.
Yeah.
That is not okay.
It is not okay. Not at all.
Not at all.
And just, you know, because as you're reading it, you're thinking like, I hope they didn't have this relationship with Mrs. Brink. Like, you're really thinking like, I hope they didn't have this relationship. I hope Margaret is smart enough to realize this is inappropriate. And then you realize, oh, damn. Ruth and her have been having this whole time.
Yeah.
That's beyond inappropriate.
Yes, because there's points where you're not sure, is Ruth manipulating and controlling Selena? Is Selena now complicit? You really are aware that Selena, as a young child, has been taken advantage of by many people in her young life. Mr. Vinci being a creep, Mrs. Brink being wholly inappropriate as her role in patron.
Yeah.
Ruth.
Who I think is a tipping point for her. Like, they've all basically groomed her into thinking this way, you know?
And then it makes me wonder, does she see Ruth as her savior?
Oh.
And that's why she went to such lengths to manipulate Margaret, because Ruth saved her from the prison that Mrs. Brink had kind of put her into.
Oh, that brings up a good point, because when we were reading, remember I told you about the quote? I wrote it down. Mrs. Brink had gave Selena a necklace, and Selena is quoted saying the setting of the necklace was not gold then, but gray. It seemed made of lead. So maybe she did see Ruth as her savior from Mrs. Brink.
Which is still problematic, though, guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Because, like Jennifer said, that's still grooming.
Yeah.
And it is wholly inappropriate. I mean, I've got very few rules about how far I can trust people before I burn a bridge. Harming a child, harming a minor, using your age, your position, your status, whatever, to manipulate and harm a child is one of those lines.
Yeah.
It's always inappropriate in my mind. And no matter how much Selena gained control of her own life in her own way, it was still inappropriate to the point where she was groomed.
Yeah, I agree. She was definitely groomed, and Ruth was probably deemed in her eyes as the savior, and so she felt this like, ooh, unhealthy attachment to her to be able to do this to Margaret. It was just disgusting.
Ruth probably saw Selena as her ticket out of being a maid to take everything from Miss Brink. She probably was in Mrs. Brink's will.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised, you know? Or that they were working towards that. And Mrs. Brink's death was sudden.
Yeah.
And unplanned for Ruth.
Exactly. And of course, Selena being in prison was unplanned too.
Yeah. Oh, but they found their ways because Ruth was Vigors and she got recommended by Boyd, who I'm pretty sure was being haunted by Ruth.
Yes. I would wholeheartedly agree.
Yes.
I believe Ruth haunted her, but I also believe Ruth probably was like the consoling friend and oh my gosh, poor boy.
Yeah. Recommend me. I don't believe any of that hokey stuff. When really she's a perpetrator of that hokey stuff.
Yeah.
She's very likely Peter Quick.
Yeah. We never get that validity, but I mean,
I guess the closest we get is that she was smoking Peter cigarettes.
Yeah.
Margaret also mentions that when Ruth starts, Margaret's mom and Pris both make comments about how ugly she is, basically, as a woman. And they're like, oh, good, now we don't have to worry about the men in the family marrying in, sleeping with the maid, because she's not handsome enough or whatever.
Right.
Because she looks manly.
Yeah.
But the wax hand of Peter Quick was very similarly described as Margaret saw Ruth.
Ooh. It is so cringy the way that the relationships played out in Selena's life. You know, as much as I didn't care for her as a character, I felt bad for her in the end because I did feel like there was no true escape for her. You know, she was haunted by the people around her.
Ugh, guys. It was such a good book, though.
It was such a good book. Like, I talked a lot of mess, but ultimately I loved it, and it was just mind-blowing to say the least because I did not see it coming.
Yeah.
Like I told you, I had a whole other idea of how it was going to end in my head, and I didn't expect that little twist.
I didn't either. I didn't go to your ending.
Yeah.
But I definitely thought that Margaret was going to be, I don't know, somehow... I really was sold that she was the unreliable narrator.
I mean, and rightfully so. It really seemed like everything that was leading up to it, everything that Margaret experienced in her past, led up to...
primed you to think.
that she was so unreliable.
She didn't even really trust herself, her own judgment.
No, she didn't.
Especially after Helen.
No.
I mean, gosh.
And the influence of her mother and her sister, and, you know, not even just that, just like people in general. Because when her sister got married, her family was saying, oh, your mom is so lucky to have you at home with her. And, you know, she probably didn't think she was worthy of anything much either. So it just played into her confidence level, I guess.
Yeah. It definitely took the unreliable narrator trope and in the last 10 pages turned it on its head because the whole time you had bought this story, these personalities, these points of view, through their own diary entries.
Yes! That's what killed me because it was through their own words.
Yeah. It just, everything was a setup from the very beginning and you just didn't see it coming.
Yeah. Like you said, she gave us all the clues.
She did.
They were all there for us.
Every single one of them was there. And the pamphlet and the violet were the biggest ones and they were such big points in my notes.
Yeah.
I completely let them fall to the side.
See, and one of the ones that I let fall to the side, there was a point where Margaret was in the cell with Selena, and Selena had written on her hand, or she had an impression on her hand, and Margaret saw the dust. And she was like, well, what is this? And that's when I was like, oh, didn't they mention that? And I just like, oh, well, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was a really great book. 10 out of 10 would recommend.
We hope that you guys enjoyed that and that this kind of primed you for our discussion on Bly Manor.
I'm so excited to talk about Bly Manor.
Yeah, that's going to be the next episode. It'll be the 4th episode. We will discuss Bly Manor. Y'all get ready.
It's gonna be a good one.
It's gonna be a good one.
Yeah.
We've got some notes. We hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yes, I hope you enjoyed it too. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye. If you liked listening to us ramble on about horror, subscribe to our podcast and tell your friends. And if you would like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Instagram or Facebook at LLOTL Podcast.
Check out our website by going to lastlibraryonTheLeft.com. Be sure to visit our About Us page to discover our 2 truths and a lie. Or, if you'd like to send us an email, you can reach us at somethingwicked@lastlibraryonTheLeft.com.